Hi guys. As I believe I mentioned to all of you in the interview, this will be the sort of closing remarks for the semester. This will be our last video. As I hope is obvious when you look at the syllabus, because I'm sure you all do. We have one assignment left. All of our major stuff is taken care of. So we don't have a ton left to talk about. Now that said, we do have a bit. So here we go, get right into it. Business stuff, we have two things. Number one, please don't forget what I was just alluding to, the interview reflection. That is that last assignment. It's on the syllabus, it's on CourseDen. There's a prompt, which if you have questions about, we can talk about. I believe we looked at it already. I know we have actually. It was a few weeks ago. You can check your notes. That's a joke. I know you don't take notes, but I would hope that it's not too tricky of an assignment. The one thing I wanted to highlight for you, it's called an interview reflection. I don't actually get to name that assignment. It's something dictated by the department. But what I wanted to point out to you is it's actually not just a reflection upon the interview. You can use that, because it's our last major assignment, as sort of a measuring stick almost, to say, okay, this is a place I've ended up at the end of the semester. Where was I at the beginning? Have I learned anything, changed in any way? Do I have a newfound understanding of anything at all? Number one. Number two, if I could help you direct that conversation at all, and I believe the prompt does this as well, I would also think about, and we've talked about this throughout the semester in different ways, but I always introduce it as branding. Another way that the prompt, I think, talks about this is rhetorical modes. I also use the terminology rhetorical poses. Take your pick, whatever makes more sense for you. But basically, we had all kinds of different improvs, but we also had several different major assignments that I had you guys sort of undertake over the course of the semester. And I would wager, from most of you anyway, that all of them, if you step back and think about it now, required a little bit something different from each of you, right? In each instance. Rhetorically. Rhetoric, by the way, in case anyone is unclear, again, is what we've talked about all semester. It's sort of how you carry yourself, how you comport yourself in a given situation. For instance, many of you, I imagine, are a little bit different as a student in a classroom versus in a room with your friends, or if you go somewhere with your parents, right? Like those are different rhetorical modes, rhetorical poses. Same kind of idea applies here. For instance, some of you, a lot of you, when you did the podcast, you were yourselves, right? Which I think we talked about too, is sort of expected in that arena. Some of you were much more yourselves than I personally was prepared for, which is cool, right? Again, that's totally what you're supposed to do, sort of in that medium, but you very much apparently carry yourself a little bit differently rhetorically in the classroom. So I was actually a little bit surprised. On that note, by the way, a few of you asked for this. I'm going to open it up here. You guys were curious about hearing each other's podcasts. I can post links to those to CourseDen. This is not any kind of an assignment. This is not any kind of anything required of anybody, okay? But if you guys want to check those out from each other, I'll try to get that posted today. At worst, I can do it over the weekend sometime. Again, 2 small children, things are tough, but be looking for that. Also, a few of you mentioned having to still get that to me, and you haven't for one reason or another, so this is like the last call for that. That needs to happen, right? Like, let's go already. But anyway, that's all the business. Oh no, sorry, one more thing. Course evals. I think those are up on CourseDen. We get a lot of emails. I'm sure you get a lot of emails too. It's a little ridiculous. I think they're on CourseDen. That's how it was handled last semester. I don't know why they would change it, but hey, people make decisions all the time. If that's different and somebody knows, please let me know. But I believe those are on CourseDen. Please get those done. They don't take very long. All right, class stuff, interview thoughts. I didn't want to give each individual person feedback, especially at this point in the semester. It's not feasible for one, and two, I think you've kind of heard enough from me, probably from all of your teachers. So I thought, let's just hit the highlights here for everybody. Number one, everybody did well. You really did. I mean, obviously, some people did better than others, and there's all kinds of reasons for that. But honestly, and I mentioned this to most of you, I think, I used to hire and fire people, as weird as that might be to imagine. And I would have hired pretty much all of you, you know? I mean, I statistically couldn't have, but no one came in and just like straight up failed the thing, right? And I think, as low a bar as that may sound, here at the end of the semester, whatever everyone has gone through, that's not bad, right? Anyway, again, some of the high points here and a few low points. Everyone pretty much had the right tone and the right mindset. And honestly, I thought this would be tricky for some of you. It might have been, not least of which because it's a pretty atypical interview in a lot of ways. But the one we didn't really talk about was, you guys know me a little bit, right? I'm not saying we're buddies, but you know me probably a good deal more than you would most anyone else you would interview for, right? We have at least some kind of a rapport. You recognize my face, things like that. That's almost never going to happen in an interview. In most situations, it's going to be a stranger. And as scary as that can be, sometimes it can actually be helpful as well, because you can be just a little more guarded, which oftentimes can be read as a little more professional, right? And so I was honestly a little worried that some of you might come into the interview and just be a little too comfortable with me. And that would carry into your rhetorical position in the interview. But I think by and large, everybody actually did a really good job in that regard, sort of treating me as a stranger, if you like. A couple notes here, sort of technical stuff. But again, it's worth thinking about, especially here in 2020, with the way the world has gone, with the way the world is headed, even if we get past some of this bullshit, right? Things to think about, because I don't think they're going away entirely. When it came to the interview, I don't know that all of you could help it, so I didn't dock anybody for this, but it's common practice to use the camera, mute yourself when you're not talking. Attentiveness, it was kind of funny. I didn't comment on this in the interview because I didn't want to throw any of you, but I know it's difficult too, because for most of you, you're just like in your house or you're somewhere with your phone, and in a group interview especially, you know, I'm talking to somebody else, they're talking, and you're muted and you're just sitting there. But to the best of your ability, you gotta find a good way to just sit and not look bored. And definitely not like kind of stare off or kind of like, or kind of, because just like you're looking at me now, I'm looking at all of you on that Zoom call. And I know it's difficult, I really do, but it's something you got to kind of think about when you're going into these, especially if it's a Zoom or some kind of other virtual meeting space. People will see you even more than they normally would in an interview, because you're just on this little screen right in front of them. So several of you were very clearly bored or distracted, and I totally get it, but at the same time, I wanted to point out you want to try to hide that a little better. There were some tech issues, and I know people can't help this. I know that. So again, I didn't dock you for it. But going forward, especially if you end up doing something like this, especially if it's an interview or something that really matters, like for your future, to the best of your ability, you want to guard against that stuff. There's ways to do it. Wi-Fi, whenever possible, is best avoided. You want to try a hard line, right? If you don't know what that means, you guys are supposed to be the internet generation. You guys worry me sometimes, but you want to try to find ways, if you can practice some of this, if you can check it somehow. There are different ways to check to see how compatible your system is tech-wise. But you want to, especially if you're going to have a real interview in the way that we did it, to the best of your ability, guard against these tech issues. Yeah, and you can Google that stuff. If you have questions about that, I can help a little bit. but it's not terribly difficult actually in most cases. Okay. Oh, and lastly, mode of dress. Most of you, I think all of you really did a pretty good job. Some like dressed more professionally than others, and you know, it's, again, it is what it is. I wasn't super worried about it, but I would also tell all of you, even if it's a virtual interview, even if you're in your house, some of you were in bed, which is like, look, I get it, it's comfy. You know, I understand, but at the same time, you know, it sends a certain message, right? And you want to not send that message probably. You don't want to look cozy. You don't even want to look like you're at your house, right? Like right now, I would imagine you can tell I'm in my son's room. Well, we're not giving an interview, right? Like this is a different space, so it's okay here. If I were interviewing with you, I could still be in this room, but I'll tell you right now, the rest of that wall is green. It's just that color. It's just blank because my son tore stuff down, right? But if I wanted to send a certain message to you, I would have the phone up on a tripod. It'd be a whole thing, right, that I'd have to do. But I would have it set up in such a way that all you would see behind me was that wall. And that sends a very different message than what you're looking at now, right? These are worth thinking about. What else? Okay, so some things you guys did well. A lot of you, I don't know, some of you, I think it was pretty clear you're doing this consciously. It seemed like some of you had interviewed before or been coached on it in some way, which is great. But many of you looked for opportunities to turn to your strengths. Like the questions I would ask you guys, you would start to answer the question, more on that in a minute, but then you would find ways to turn it to like sort of values that motivate you, or aspirations, goals that you have, experience you might have in the sort of arena you're being interviewed for, or you might mention that like, you know, I just love people, you know, which is all crap that people interviewing you love to hear, right? And the trick is, again, to take whatever is asked of you and answer it, okay? But then steer the conversation subtly into those areas where you feel strong, where you can kind of speak about yourself in a positive way, right? And a lot of you are able to do that. So that's something to think about going forward. Trying to steer the conversation and just kind of flex a little bit. On questions, I would say be specific and actually answer the questions. Some of you struggled with this. And honestly, I just see a lot of this from students. There are different reasons as to why that could be, and I won't trouble you with them here, but basically, when someone asks you a question, you want to answer it, but you want to be specific, especially in an interview. So some of you are more given to answering a thing generally, like one question I asked everyone was like, tell me about a time you failed at something, right? I'm sure you guys remember that. Listen to that question. A time you failed at something, like a specific episode, a thing that happened. Now I understand the question generally is asking, how do you deal with failure? How do you move past it? How does it shape you? Are you different now? And you got to get to those things, but you got to start with the time, the one moment. We've all had millions of failures, right? Every day. I stubbed my toe this morning. That was a failure. It felt all, you know, but you need that one time because the question asks for it. And some of you kind of skated right past that and got to the more general, just this is how I try to deal with failure. This is how I view it. And it's not strictly answering the question as it's been asked. So you want to try to pay attention to that stuff, okay? Pick up on those details. I would also say be careful with what you reveal about yourself. Not everyone did this, but it's worth pointing out. It's sort of the opposite of steering the conversation to your strengths. Some of you steered it toward, and it's going to feel like I'm calling people out. I'm not going to mention names, but some people mentioned like that they're not great with people or they don't like talking to people. Hey, by the way, I don't like talking to people. I don't. It's awful. I wouldn't say that in an interview, right? Somebody said that they like to get up early, so of course I asked, well, how early? And they said before 12, and I laughed at them. Unintentional. I didn't, you know, I didn't know they were going to say that, right? So I just honestly reacted, but that's not early, and it's definitely not early if you're looking to get a job somewhere. Now my advice would be, you know, if you're going to say you get up early, fine. And if they follow up and ask that, you got to know a little bit more about the situation you're going into. And this brings me to my last point on the interviews. You might have to lie. I'm not saying, I would never encourage lying to such a degree that, like, I'm not talking about like some movie you've seen where you fucking have another identity, right? We're not talking about that. White lies, like, oh yeah, I'm an early riser, blah, blah, blah. Oh, how early did you get up? I mean, most days, unless, you know, I stayed up late working for school, I try to be up around 5:30, you know. Did I do that when I was 20? No. Am I going to tell this person interviewing me what I'm actually doing back when I was 20? No. Don't be insane, right? The way I characterize this to some of you, I know before the interviews I talked about how you can think about it as an improv, which it is. You're playing a role in being interviewed. I'm playing a role in interviewing you. There are some rules that we all kind of understand, and we all kind of play that part. Another way to think about it, go into it with a first date mentality. You're trying to impress this person. I'm not saying you're not worthwhile just as you are. I'm not saying you don't have things to offer, because you do. But there is a reason that we don't show ourselves completely in that first date, right? And it's because first impressions, unfortunately, are much more weighted. They're much more important to begin with. And as a result, people judge you more harshly in those spaces, first dates, interviews, things like this. Once you get the job and you're there for a while and they learn about you and they understand, oh no, this guy, you know, he's a hard worker. He doesn't get up to 11, which is kind of wild, but I was 20 once, you know, like, that's fine. Much like after a first date, if you have a relationship with somebody, you grow, and then, you know, that stuff kind of falls away. But that's not what the interview is. That's not what a first date is. And sometimes you gotta kind of lie, white lies, to puff yourself up, to hide some of these issues that they may weigh more than they should, like saying that 11 o'clock or 10:30 in the morning is early, saying that you hate talking to people. You want to keep that to yourself at the very least. That's not even a lie, right? That's just obfuscating the truth. That's muddying the waters a little bit. Do that for yourself. It's good advice. Closing remarks about the class. I've kept this as short as I can. We'll round out right about 20 minutes, I hope. I'm not going to keep you any longer. What I would offer is just think about what we've talked about all semester, right? Like, for what this class is, and I like to think it's a more fun class than some others. It's certainly much less serious, sort of by design. But whatever you end up going into, there's all kinds of new careers and new avenues for people to figure out what they want to be in the world, okay? And there's a lot of old ones too still kicking around. Somebody in this class may end up being like an insurance agent. We need those people, right? No matter what you end up doing, I think now, 2020 and forward, everything is going to be much more virtual. Everything is going to be much more connected online, driven by social media, blah, blah, blah. You get it. And as a result, your sort of digital footprint that you leave, we call it branding, is gonna follow you, right? And that's a weird bit of pressure, and I hate that for you. I'm not saying that I'm not right there with you. So it's worth thinking about not only, again, how you approach these different rhetorical situations and carry yourself and kind of almost code switch sometimes, unfortunately. And that's kind of what's required of us in those situations. But also, all of those things sort of make a fuller picture of you. The trouble is, again, this day and age, people are going to take those small pieces and they're going to, much like the first date mentality, the interview, people are going to judge you on that small instance and think they know like the whole picture. That's sort of unavoidable right now, unless the world changes in a very real way that I don't see. Maybe some of you are more hopeful than I am. But my point is, thinking about this class, if you're going to apply anything we've talked about, I would hope it's that. The idea that no matter where you go professionally, because that's kind of where this class skews, I think more and more that's getting harder to separate from your life, especially for people your age. Most of you are very online, much more than I ever was. Like I have a Facebook to see when my wife posts pictures of my kids. You know what I'm saying? That's the only, I have a Twitter that I don't use. 'Cause I follow a couple people. That's it. Like I don't care about that stuff, but I know you guys do, and the people younger than you do, and a lot of people, like the whole world does. So that's how you're going to not just ingest information about others, but how it's going to be ingested about you. And that's worth thinking about as you go. The last thing I would say, I don't want anyone to, I mentioned earlier, lying. I'm never saying that needs to be applied across the board. That needs to be sort of how you start living. That we're gonna raise a nation of sociopaths if we do that, okay? But what I am advising you to do, when you go digital, when you go virtual, when you go online, especially if it's in a professional setting, I struggle with this in my own life, but more and more, even in a personal setting, even stuff that you think is private, usually isn't. If it's somehow digital, if it can get online, it probably will. Do you know what I mean? So it's just worth thinking about, how am I positioning myself rhetorically? How am I shaping my digital footprint, my brand, if you like? And how's that going to shape sort of how people understand me? Because people will misunderstand you. That's going to happen. But I think a lot of the time, knowing that ahead of time can help us shape that narrative and maybe get ahead of some of that ridiculousness. I said this at some point in class. I hate, in a very real way, that's kind of where we're at. I'm not a fan of it at all. But if the point of this class is to prepare you for sort of talking to folks and more generally navigating sort of communicative pressures and whatnot, that's a bunch of scholarly language, but that's what we're getting at here. That's the world we're in now, and you're almost asked to live in that space constantly. I think for some of you, worries me for my kids, but that is what it is. So I hope in some respects what we've done this semester has prepared you at least a little bit. That's all we can accomplish in a semester, especially one like this where I see you half as often. I will say, again, I think everyone did well. I think everyone for the most part showed improvement over the course of the semester. I honestly believe that. I know some people had some troubles like outside of class and what have you. But again, I would hope all of you in some way, shape, or form feel like you can take what we did this semester and apply it a little bit. And I mean it. Anytime you feel like you're in a situation that you're less prepared or you feel awkward, know that those are very human emotions to feel, but also know that the improvs we did this semester, as dumb as they were, it's no different. Like you can play a part to get through some moments, right? I'm not saying you can't also enjoy them as a human being, but if you have to navigate, especially a professional situation, those are almost always trash. They're almost always awkward and bogus, and that doesn't mean you have to feel that way. So that's kind of part of what we did this semester anyway. Other than that, again, don't forget about your course evals. I'm supposed to remind you guys. I'll probably send an email, but God, who checks their email? I believe they're on Coursden. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. The only other thing I have, I expect I won't see most of you. I mean, this is a 2050. I don't teach anything above that. They sometimes give me creative writing. If you guys get crazy later on in your collegiate lives, I'll catch you there. I'm teaching a class next semester on action movies, which honestly I think is going to be pretty rad. But, you know, otherwise, maybe I'll see some of you around. I hope everyone's well, stay safe, and yeah, that's all I got. Thanks.